Hello ladies and gents, it's Hagbard Celine here on another beautiful afternoon, and I decided to make some kind of throwback old school content, mostly because I was reminded that we're still within the time period known as Ramadan. So, in that spirit, we're going to be reading an analysis of the Pact of Umar, as is hosted on WikiIslam. Much has been said about the Pact of Umar, and much of it distinctly positive. Its non-Muslim admirers gleefully compare its contents to the treatment of religious minorities in medieval Europe, while ignoring its influence and conformity with Islamic scriptural sources, which still govern the treatment of minorities in the East today. This article analyzes the rights and limitations placed on Christians to see just how free non-Muslims really were under the rightly guided Caliph. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, this is a document to the servant of Allah, Umar, the leader of the faithful, from the Christians of such and such city. When you, Muslims, came to us, we requested safety for ourselves, children, and property, and followers of our religion. We made a condition on ourselves that... Before we continue, at first reading it seems like this pact was drafted by the Christians themselves, however the terms were dictated to them by Umar. This is standard procedure for any agreement we sign even today, whether it be a receipt for a grocery delivery or the deeds to our homes. This, along with the true purpose of some of its demands, are confirmed by Ibn Kathir in his widely accepted Tasfir. Allah said, until they pay the jizya, if they do not choose to embrace Islam with willing submission in defeat and subservience, and feel themselves subdued, disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of Dhimmi or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated. Muslim recorded from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, do not initiate the salam to the Jews and Christians, and if you meet any of them in the road, force them into its narrowest alley. This is why the leader of the faithful, Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, demanded his well-known conditions be met by these Christians, these conditions that ensured their continued humiliation, degradation, and disgrace. So we find that not only many of the demands in the pact, but also the jizya, a poll tax levied against non-Muslims, which the Christians had to pay, were primarily meant to humiliate them. We will neither erect in our areas a monastery, church, nor sanctuary for a monk. We come to our first set of prohibitions. No new monasteries, no new churches, no new sanctuaries. This prohibition still exists in various forms in many Islamic countries. One can only imagine the uproar and condemnation if anything similar were to take place in the West. Some may think that the Syrians would have been pleased with Umar allowing them to keep their existing places of worship, which takes us to our next prohibition. Nor restore any place of worship in need of restoration. So, no new churches for the Syrians, and the ones that did exist, well, they had to watch as they slowly decayed and fell into ruin. As a community, there's very little that can be more humiliating for a Christian, Jew, Hindu, or Buddhist than having to watch a holy site wither away. No doubt Umar envisioned the communities themselves would also eventually wither away and die. Nor use any of them for the purpose of enmity against the Muslims. This prohibition seems fair enough, although the Muslim invaders do seem to have been projecting their own self-image on others. Mosques are notorious for being breeding grounds for anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, anti-women, anti-gay, anti-Western sentiment. Often, when Muslims riot and attack non-Muslims, it's following their Friday prayers. Which should not come as a surprise, considering during Muhammad's time the call to prayer could also be a call to war. We will not prevent any Muslim from resting in our churches whether they come by day or night, and we will open the doors of our houses of worship to the wayfarer and the passerby. Forcing themselves into others' properties, especially into religious sanctuaries, is extremely rude. But as long as they don't do what the Palestinian Muslims do, i.e. urinate on scrolls or use Bibles as toilet paper, it should be tolerable. Those Muslims are welcome as guests who will enjoy boarding and food for 3 days. The abuse of non-Muslim property goes from tolerable to humiliating. Not only are the Muslims allowed to come and go as they please, but the Christians are forced to wait on them hand and foot. We will not allow a spy against Muslims into our churches and homes or hide deceit or betrayal against Muslims. Again, this condition would be expected from an invading army. We will not teach our children the Quran. Non-Muslims, like dogs, pigs, and feces, are considered najis, or impure. So this stipulation is hardly surprising. Also recorded in the Sahih Hadiths is the command not to let the Quran fall into enemy hands, as they may quarrel with you over it. Apparently Muslims were afraid of non-Muslims scrutinizing their holy book. We will not publicize practices of shirk. Shirk refers to the taking of gods besides Allah, or polytheism, and is considered to be the most heinous crime against the Islamic God. Due to Muhammad's abysmal understanding of the Trinity doctrine, Muslims consider all Trinitarian Christians to be polytheists. This condition in the pact prevents Christians from proclaiming their religion publicly. We will not invite anyone to shirk or prevent any of our fellows from embracing Islam if they choose to do so. As per most Islamic nations today, it's fine for Muslims to proselytize and gain converts, but for a non-Muslim to do the same is strictly forbidden. According to the above, even discussing this important matter with a prospective convert would mean violating the agreement. These restrictions limited the number of Muslim apostates and, coupled with the jizya, would ensure a steady decline in Islamization of non-Muslim populations. We will respect Muslims. This perfectly exemplifies the common Islamic attitude towards others. They demand that others give them, their culture, and their prophet respect, yet fail to provide us with a valid reason why we should. In most modern-day cultures, it's accepted that respect must be earned, and you do not achieve this by invading foreign lands and officially labeling its native populations as second-class citizens. We will move from the places we sit if they choose to sit in them. The difference lay in the fact that you don't hear Americans defending such shameful histories by pointing to dimitude today in Muslim lands, or you don't hear them defending the slave trade by pointing out that the number of innocent Africans who were taken, or died in the process of being taken, as slaves over the last 14 centuries of Islamic slavery, is estimated to be higher than 140 million, dwarfing the 11 million Africans who were transported across the Atlantic. Such moral relativism seems only to be accepted if applied to Islam by those defending Islam. We will not imitate their clothing, caps, turbans, sandals, hairstyles, speech, nicknames, and title names. The overt hatred and disdain for everything non-Muslim is truly outstanding. These prohibitions reflect Muhammad's wishes when he said Jews and Christians do not dye their hair, so you should do the opposite of what they do, and to act differently from them. Or ride on saddles. Muslims look very fondly on horses and such. This may be due to Muhammad claiming he rode the Burq, a mythical horse-like flying creature, on his night journey. This prohibition is meant to show Islamic superiority. We will not hang swords on the shoulders, collect weapons of any kind, or carry these weapons. Apologists often claim jizya was merely a tax for exemption from military service. However, this is untrue. The Quran itself readily admits the jizya as a form of humiliation, meant to display the superior status of Muslims and the subdued state of non-Muslims. And as jihad is a religious duty among Muslims, it would make little sense for a non-Muslim dhimmi to participate. There's also another reason for this exemption, and this prohibition against owning or carrying weapons demonstrates it perfectly. They did not want the conquered natives to be armed. We will not encrypt our stamps in Arabic. As with Muhammad and the Kaaba, their veneration of the Arabic language borders on idolatry. This becomes all the more humorous when you consider Islam and the Arabic language's shared pagan heritage. Or sell liquor. This restriction on the sale of alcohol, for many, would have seriously hampered the Christian practice of eating bread and drinking wine, the Eucharist, on Sundays. We will have the front of our hair cut and wear customary clothes wherever we are. These degrading requirements were so Christians could be easily identified on sight. We will wear belts around our waist. The belt being referred to as the zunar, a wide belt made of cloth. The similarities between this and the Nazi requirement for Jews to wear an armband or yellow stars is uncanny. In fact, the yellow star, used by the Nazis as a badge of shame against the Jews, first introduced by the Caliph of Baghdad in the 9th century, and spread to the West in medieval times. Unsurprisingly, this is Islam's so-called Golden Age inventions, which you won't find proudly displayed on Dawa websites. Refraining from erecting crosses on the outside of our churches. One can only imagine how many crosses had to be torn down due to this prohibition. Muhammad himself used to destroy anything in his home which bore the Christian symbol of the cross. And refrain from demonstrating them and our books in public in Muslim fairways and markets. Like in Saudi Arabia today, carrying a Bible or wearing a cross or crucifix was strictly forbidden. We will not sound the bells of our churches except discreetly. How ironic this is, in a world where a Buddhist cannot visit the most holy of Buddhist sites without having the spiritual experience raped by the Islamic call to prayer, which continues for half an hour. Or raise our voices while reciting our holy books inside of our churches in the presence of Muslims. One must wonder why a Muslim would be present in a church during services. Oh, no doubt they'd come for their free meals and board. Nor raise our voices with prayer at our funerals. Christians mourned in silence, lest they offend the Muslim invaders. Or light torches in funeral processions in the fairways of Muslims or their markets. This, and many other restrictions, seem to serve only two purposes. First, to humiliate, and second, to make the Christian community an invisible one. Like the non-Muslims today in the East who live as ghosts, rarely discussed by the progressive West, unless on Islam-critical sites. We will not bury our dead next to the Muslim dead. According to most Islamic scholars, this is a compulsory requirement for Muslims to be buried in separate cemeteries from non-Muslims. In Switzerland, Muslims, approximately 4.5% of the population, say they want to be buried with dignity, and are therefore calling for Islamic cemeteries in every canton. And who can blame them when they equate non-Muslims with feces? Or by servants who were captured by Muslims. This was most likely to avoid Christians or other people from buying back their own. We will be guides for Muslims and refrain from breaching their privacy in their homes. So Muslims are welcome to impose on Christians all they please, but for a Christian to enter a Muslim home would be violating the pact. Even today, their demands apply only to others and not themselves. They want others to accept their religion as they would accept any other religion, and yet fail to do likewise in any country where they become a majority. We will not beat any Muslim. Assaulting someone would have already been an offense, so this prohibition can only make sense when applied to beating someone in self-defense. So, non-Muslims were not even allowed to defend themselves or their families against unwarranted attacks. This and the previous prohibition against owning or carrying weapons made sure that the Christians were left completely defenseless. These are the conditions that we set against ourselves and the followers of our religion in return for safety and protection. If we break any of these promises that we set for your benefit against ourselves, then our dhimmi, promise of protection, is broken. You are allowed to do with us what you are allowed of people of defiance and rebellion. We come to the closing of the pact, which leaves not only the solitary lawbreaker, but the entire Christian community a stern warning. The Quran tells us for people who rebel, there is a painful doom. Today, this has provided on many occasions the pretext for Muslims to viciously attack non-Muslim communities for the smallest of perceived slights. That's it for me, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed this reading of the analysis of the Pact of Umar, and, as usual, stay safe, good luck, and goodbye. And for all the Muslim listeners out there, Happy Ramadan!